Hello, old friend. I know it's been a while, but this is just the start of some really good stuff that I'm cooking up. So do stick around if you want to see more like this. And with that out of the way, my friend, let's get right into this video. I do hope you enjoy it. The earliest sensation I can remember could only have been described as much like a cathedral at dawn. That is to say, my ears rang louder than church bells, and my eyes were blinded by a light that could outshine the sun. It was as if my senses had gone berserk, taking every little input and perceiving it tenfold. There was a choir to be found within my chapel of pain. Voices all around me rang out. Some screamed, some moaned, but all were utterly devoid of hope. I came to an epiphany. My eyes, though blinded by unimaginable light, were physically shut. Dread thoughts came to mind, hints and imaginings of what could lie out there. Curiosity, though, won out in the end, forcing both eyes open with a sticky, wet sensation. I looked down at my body. My thin, emaciated limbs were covered by a papery gown. The skin that I could see was pale and clammy, as if I hadn't been exposed to proper light in a while. The glow which had irritated me so, I now saw, came from pale, yellow-green lights. Their color was nauseating to look at, and I couldn't be sure if the smoky substance in the air around them came from the lamps directly, or was merely illuminated by their presence. Either way, it gave the air an unnatural heaviness which seemed to oppress me, keep me tied to the ground. I looked around and saw that I wasn't alone in the room. There were similar people to me with pale, damp skin. Their heads were bald, their faces expressionless as they laid there. Though there were 7, I couldn't tell them apart. It unsettled me so that to look at them made me feel even sicker than the pale lantern's unnatural light and the thick, heavy air. There was a single door which led out of the room, where the other patients reclined idly and watched me with a bizarre malignancy. It almost blended in with the dull grayness of the stone walls, but stood out due to the door being a surprisingly rounded opening in an otherwise sharply carven space. I heard an odd noise, like the moist slapping of dampened flesh upon itself. Something was coming. A shape slithered into view. It was a tall man dressed in a long, tattered lab coat. Upon a lanyard about his neck hung a name tag, declaring him to be Dr. Kensington of the Healers Initiative. His face was covered by a combination of a rounded cap, sunglasses, and a surgical mask. He raised a hand slowly, his arm covered by some kind of black bodysuit which didn't reveal even a finger on his hand. He pointed right at me. A hollow voice came from behind the mask, which was deep and smooth, almost musical. Patient 1036. I will see you now. Follow me. My mind was foggy, so I couldn't remember what treatment I had come here to receive, but I knew that it was something which would make my life a lot better. It's why I had come to this clinic, or at least that's what I could remember. I followed Dr. Kensington out of the waiting room and through the dimly lit halls of the hospital. I noticed that Kensington's movements had the strangest sort of suggestion that it might not be a man under that lab coat. It was as if he might have somehow been boneless. I could hear screams and moans in the distance and figured we must be passing by the most gravely injured patients. The doctor spoke once again. Patient 1036. It is time for you to realize your purpose in life. This is going to be a big change for you, but it will be quite worthwhile. After some time, it should even begin to feel good. As he finished, he led me into a tiny room with 2 tables. One was an empty metal gurney. Another was the same type of table, but it had a patient strapped to it. Their left arm was severed at the elbow, replaced with an assortment of rusty blades which sprouted from the wound like a metal flower. Their legs were replaced with iron prosthetics which seemed designed more for combat than mobility. Their skin had grown even paler, barely resembling that of a human. Most terrifying of all, however, was that their head was either replaced or covered entirely by a thick casing of iron. Patient 1036. It is time. Please lie down on the operating table. I almost did as he said. I couldn't think of any other way. Yet something in me seemed to respond. Will I become like that patient? I had choked out that whisper before I could even think about what to say next. My voice was gravelly, like I hadn't spoken before in my life. Yes, patient 1036. That is what you were created for. It is the best thing you can hope for in life. I couldn't deny him. I didn't even know what I was created for. Yet still I wanted to preserve my feeble body and cloudy mind. I needed to resist, but I didn't know how. In a flash I turned around and with one fluid motion ripped off the doctor's glasses and mask. My mouth fell open, and the scream that rent my throat spread from between my lips. It was indescribable, the kind of fear I felt in those moments. If the patient on the table had stood up and attacked me with those wicked blades, I would have not felt half the all-encompassing terror that I did in those moments. I turned my back on the doctor and began to run toward the door. Long fingers slapped against my shoulder in an attempt to grab me, but I shifted my weight and slid out from between them as I flew out of that sickening place and into the winding, incomprehensible halls of a hospital, or perhaps a world entirely hostile to me. I heard that wet slapping noise once more, and knew that the doctor was giving chase. I didn't want to, but out of instinct I turned and looked. That fleeting glimpse at a nightmare was just what I needed. Not only did it confirm my darkest fears, but it assured me that allowing myself to be caught was entirely out of the question. I had to leave this place, or I would surely meet with a fate worse than death. On and on through those ailing halls I charged, the living nightmare never more than a few paces behind me. It was that terror which made me forget the weakness of my body, the frailty of my mind. I could escape. I had to. As I ran, I began to notice a certain quality. The air felt more nourishing and less oppressive. If the gaseous substances in the air were thinning, that had to mean I was nearing an exit from this horrid place. I kept my eyes peeled, noticing that the gas had thinned enough that I could see with the naked eye how the concentration was lighter down a certain hallway. I turned down it, nearly snapping my ankles in the process, and found myself met with a cavernous opening, a crude contrast to the otherwise elegantly designed hospital. The ground beneath my bare feet turned coarse and rugged, and I noticed that the wet slapping noises had come to a halt. Chancing a glance behind, I saw that Dr. Kensington had paused. He stood at the end of the hallway, putting his mask back on. Before he reached into his pocket for another pair of sunglasses, I witnessed just enough that I was certain he was staring at me with those blackened pits in his soft skull could still be called eyes, that is. I wasn't sticking around to see whether he had decided to let me go. I charged out of the cave and into the world beyond. Before my eyes stretched a veritable wasteland. The sky was covered with wicked black clouds. I was standing in what was once a city. High towers and large complexes with similar architecture to the hospital stretched as far as the eye could see. Yet it wasn't the same. The structure seemed to have been blasted and rotted until only their bones remained. A city which once must have been bustling with people was now empty, almost silent. Not entirely silent, though. Beyond the rustling of the wind, something could be heard. It was some sort of rumbling, less like the sound of distant thunder and more like the throaty growls of a beast that's just a bit closer than one might wish. A shadow moved in a nearby tower, and I pretended not to notice. Something was hunting me, that much was sure. I couldn't tell what, because it was smart, but if it realized that I had it figured out, then it wouldn't hold back and wait for an ambush. I had to stall for time, to dance with my predator until I had figured out a way to turn the tables. I was still tired from being chased by Kensington. I doubted I even had the strength to make it back to his hospital before the beast caught me. Was this beast what had gutted this city? Was it one of many things which had done so? Was the despair I felt now something experienced by every man, woman, and child who lived here? The shadow was closing in on me now. I looked around, trying to find a weapon, or some path other than the cave mouth leading back into the hospital. Nothing showed itself readily. As I was about to give up hope, a soft scraping sound met my ears. It was not the beast in the shadows, as that thing hadn't moved. No, the scraping was something far more metallic. From inside the cave mouth, a shadow appeared. It wasn't Dr. Kensington as I might have expected. Instead, it was one of his patients, one who hadn't escaped the nightmarish grafting procedure like I had. Its iron feet dragged on the ground. The weight of its weaponized left hand and encased head made its shambling gait appear quite clumsy. It walked right past me, paying no mind to my presence. The beast came out of the shadows, a mass of flesh which twisted and writhed in all the wrong ways. I screamed and took a few steps back. The thing lowered its body in a crouch, then leapt into the air, crossing what must have been 30 feet with one leap. The abomination wasn't given the luxury of landing. The grafted patient, a mass of blades and fury, was propelled into the air by those iron legs and caught the monster midair. Those blades. I can still picture them shredding the flesh of the beast with such cruel efficiency. Blood sprayed like a fountain, the patient seeming to relish being soaked down to the bone. It dug those iron claws in again and again, until there was no beast left. There was only a puddle, with assorted chunks of meat spread all around it. I wasn't going to wait around up here to get shredded by another beast. I promptly got back up and entered the cave mouth. Dr. Kensington knew what was going on here. He had to. He was my only hope left. He was waiting there at the entrance to the hospital. His coat, hat, mask, and sunglasses were gathered neatly on the ground. He held the lanyard in his hand. The skin-tight bodysuit was all he wore, and it exposed the fact that every part of his body was about twice as long as a normal man's, and that he had no rigid supporting structures anywhere in his body. If it weren't for constant use of muscles I couldn't begin to comprehend, he might have entirely softened into a puddle of white fluid. Dr. Kensington, I have come back of my own free will. I ask that you modify my body the way you modified the patient you sent to protect me. At this, Kensington raised his free hand, cutting me off. That flabby rubber maw of his opened, and the sonorous resonance poured forth again. I can't. Healing initiative higher ups. Can't graft someone who's seen the outside. The modification of the brain is critical for a combat model's success, and it just won't take on a failure like you. There's only one fate left for you. Failure 1036. The doctor walked up to me and draped the lanyard around my neck. With one finger, or perhaps one tentacle, he pushed it up against my chest. This is exactly how the previous owner of that name tag told me to do this. You will be the new Kensington. You will perform the surgeries I do. You will turn your fellow patients into combat models and send them into the world to cleanse it of monsters. You will let the hallucinogenic gas corrupt your body and mind as it did mine. It's the only way of keeping those artificial people docile, and the only way of stealing your nerves as you commit these atrocities. You will take up those coverings when your body softens into uselessness, and one day, when one of your subjects tries to escape, you will take the same step I did today. The doctor finished, and in doing so, he closed his floppy jaw forevermore, and silently set out into the wasteland. I broke down into tears, lying on the hospital floor, and accepting the fate which I had been granted.